Good evening, everyone. I would I like to begin with a little bit of an introduction of myself. Dr. Kofi Mbiah is my name, former Chief Executive of the Ghana Shippers Authority. I also was the chairman of the legal committee of the International Maritime Organization, and I have been a visiting professor at the World Maritime University and also at the IMO International Maritime Law Institute. Presently, I am a maritime law and management consultant, and I also double as chief executive of the Ghana Chamber of Shipping. This evening, it is my intention to deal with the topic the nature and challenges of global competition for today's business. I intend, by way of outline, to do a little bit of introduction, look at globalization, and then the global business generally. I'll look at global competition and what it offers. And that then would lead me to talk a little bit about the new dynamics. And with the new dynamics, certain challenges come to the fore. So, what are some of these challenges which come to the fore, and how do we address these challenges? I'll look at the impact of globalization, and then I would also address issues such as strategic partnerships, which today have been put in place to address some of the challenges of globalization. Then I will draw a few conclusions. I must begin off first by indicating that globalization is a relatively new phenomenon. This has come about especially around the 1980s and the 90s. It has taken center stage in the global economy. In fact, it has arisen because of the increasing convergence and interdependence of national economies and the international scope and availability of markets. Not only markets, but also the distribution systems, the logistics, the capital, the labor, the technology that go with this have all become imperative. And it is as a result of the convergence of these things that, in fact, we talk about the global marketplace or globalization. And in fact, this some would like to reduce into what we would refer to as the borderless economy. So, by way of introduction, this is what we'll be looking at the global picture in terms of the interdependence of national economies, which hitherto did not exist because national economies operated in silos and each of them acted in its own interest, not thinking about mutual beneficial advantages or, if you like, synergies that could be drawn from global convergence and interdependence. And subsequently, this is what has happened over the last 30 to 40 years. I must also mention, by way of introduction, that the global economy generally, today as we see it, is of recent origins, and a lot of changes have taken place within a very short period. Markets which were hitherto secluded and confined are today opened up, and these markets are today, if you like, entered into by players from all over the world. That has made the global marketplace indeed a very small place in which various actors come to play their business. I must mention that it is of recent origins also because if one were to go back just a few years, you would realize the isolation sometimes that were defined by ideology. The Soviet Union, the Eastern European satellite countries, all of them, because of ideology, they opted out of the global economic system. And so did China. If you also look at India, India also, and also with its neighbors like Pakistan, they closed their doors to international trade on a very large scale, and consequently, that interdependence and interconnectivity which we see today was non-existent. And so the silo operations of various economies meant that the interdependencies were lost on many economies. Hence, the benefits of globalization could not be derived because Each country was looking at itself in terms of what will be the ultimate benefit that it is to derive from operating in isolation. Today, however, companies are acting globally. In the developed world, there is an increasing commitment to emerging markets at a faster rate than ever before. If we were to look at this in terms of acceleration, then one would realize that the speed at which today developed economies are moving closer to markets which are emerging markets is today more about, if you like, 70 to 80% of acceleration, as against a situation where just a couple of years ago we will be talking about an acceleration of about 20 to 30%. This is all because the developed economies today are faced with the prospect of stagnation. It is just a result of a combination of low growth and high inflation in some of these economies. And consequently, you would realize that in the US, Europe, Japan, companies today are plunging into the high growth economies, not only of Asia, of Eastern Europe, Latin America, the BRICS, as we call it, and now increasingly to the new frontier, Africa. That new frontier that now has opportunities and today in many parts is growing at a faster rate than any part of the world in terms of GDP growth. So that has become very important for developed economies in looking at emerging markets for the sake of expanding their economies and dealing with the issues that relate to low growth and high inflation. It is also important to mention that businesses today are affected by actions of international competitors as a result of the global or the globalization process. It is indeed accurate to state that today businesses cannot operate in isolation because this is the information age and all information regarding businesses are carried on the information superhighway, such that it has become increasingly difficult to operate in isolation. Some of the key ingredients that have stimulated global competition today include the fact that business distance has shrunk. So the shrinking of business distances itself makes it possible today for countries or smaller companies even operating from their warehouses or from a garage or from a small isolated place to deal with their counterparts abroad. And that business distance, which has shrunk as a result of communications and technology, today is one of the key ingredients that have stimulated global competition. In addition to that, communication time has also shrunk. Hitherto, it took days, sometimes weeks, in order to communicate from one part of the globe to the other. Today, by the time a sector of the world economy is waking up, another sector is going to bed. And by the time they wake up, information is already available to them and they are transacting business already on a very high scale. I must also mention that global brands, global brands as a result of marketing, advertising also have improved over the period. And these have all helped to stimulate global competition because today if you put your brand out there on the internet, you don't need much by way of advertisement and marketing for others to realize that brand. Hitherto, it was only a few brands that had the opportunity of propagating their message. Today, however, small brands have been able to infiltrate the marketplace, and it is now possible for them to put forth themselves as brands. If we look today at the global marketplace, global giants like Google, like Facebook, like WhatsApp. All of these global brands were hitherto unknown, but today communication, business distance has made it possible for us to have these come to the fore in terms of what they do. Google, Facebook, um, WhatsApp, Microsoft, all of these are today global brands. There is also a decline in barriers to the free flow of goods, services, and capital. This has been accentuated by the World Trade Organization, in which a number of barriers have come down. And with the coming down of these barriers, there is now the free flow of goods and services. So, also, the coming down of some of the ideological inclinations which have always hindered trade patterns have also been removed. And with the removal of these barriers, have led to free flow of goods, services, and more importantly, of capital. Capital has been able to reach ends which hitherto capital could not reach because of lack of information. Today, because of availability of information, because of the decline of barriers, capital has gotten to many places for the purposes of investment. All sectors, I must say today, because of what I have just mentioned, are open to international competition. So you may be a multinational company, but remember that there could be other companies that could easily also come into the fray and compete even with multinational companies. And so now more multinational companies are now increasingly targeting whole or large parts of the globe as their domestic market. They are not now looking only within certain segmented market areas as those that they could rely upon, but are now shifting and looking at areas of the globe and regarding this as their domestic market. And in fact, in many of these things, these places, manufacturing itself is taking place there, taking advantage of low labor rates in some of these emerging economies, and consequently, parts and things are being produced in these areas, and it is more now like a domestic market than a foreign market for a multinational company. It must be stated that European companies today generate over 53% of sales in developed Europe, while their share of emerging markets has leapt from 12% in 2007 to about 29% in 2013, and today up to about 34% in 2017. So that clearly shows that European companies today are looking more towards emerging markets for growth in their trade. Imagine emerging markets and today by themselves also are becoming leaders in key industries because of the transfer of technology, and also the taking advantage of labor and other tax conditions in these climates. Two of the top five global wireless technology companies today are from China, Huawei and ZTE. If you go to Mexico, Mexico's Cemex is the world's largest building materials supplier, and the Brazilian-run Anheuser-Busch InBev is the biggest brewer in the world today. Hitherto, it used to be in Belgium, but today it's in Brazil, and they are the biggest brewer in the world today. Wipro, Infosys, and TCS together are the top software exporters. So it tells you clearly that a lot is changing today in the global marketplace, and the nature of global competition itself is changing. There are a number of challenges, even as we talk about global competition, we talk about the reduction in barriers, the free flow of trade in goods, services, and capital. It is important to mention that within this whole frame of globalization also exist some challenges. These challenges, which sometimes, if you like, are a hindrance to the patterns of global trade which we have seen over the last decade or two. These are sometimes differences in customs and culture. I mean, Uh, the Chinese have a way of doing business, and one ought to know, understand, and appreciate the way in which the Chinese do their business. It is different from the way in which the Americans will do their business, different in the way in which Africa would conduct its business, and different from the way in which Asia, or if you like, Russia for that matter, would conduct their business. So these differences in customs, in language, sometimes in currency, they all have an impact in terms of the nature of the global competition. So they bring forth new challenges which ought to be studied and therefore consequently ought to be addressed. Trade practices also differ from country to country. The trade practices in emerging countries, trade practices in China, for example, are different from trade practices in other areas, especially the traditional and known markets of the Americas, the Europes, which we have dealt with over a long period, should be distinguished from the trade practices, if you like, of China or the new Eastern Bloc, as one would call the new European countries. Then an assessment of risk, and then there is also the uncertainty for new market entrants. So these are some of the challenges that confront global competition presently. There is an uncertainty for new market entrants who need to study, appreciate, understand the global marketplace before they can enter appropriately. How is global competition changing companies? I think today it's important for us to try and find out how global competition is affecting the way in which companies today are operating, both on the domestic or national scale and also on the global scale. If today you look at the expansion in terms of operation in emerging markets, increase in sales, companies such as Unilever, they have spread their tentacles, all over the globe. And it is important to realize that these are changing times, even for these companies, which traditionally have been, if you like, in situ in many of these countries and did not face any competition at all. Today, however, all that is changing for these companies, and therefore, these companies have to go into emerging markets knowing that they are faced with global competition. Then establishment of core decision-making units in emerging markets. Today, companies like Microsoft, they have decision-making bodies even in China. So has Cisco Systems in India. So there is a devolution, if you like, of that centralized power that hitherto used to be there to areas where global companies are now moving into. And in these places, they are empowering companies over there for decision making in terms of what they do. So all of this is part of the dynamics that is taking place in terms of global competition. There is also increased internationalization of staff. If you today you look at Japanese companies, if you take companies like CNN, if you take companies like Microsoft, if you take other global companies, you will realize that increasingly there is an infusion, if you like, of various nationalities in these, and sometimes they bring to bear some of the cultural differences that exist in various places as far as these global companies are concerned. So there is an increased internationalization taking place also among these companies. There is a growing number of executives with emerging markets making it to the boardrooms today. Today, they are playing a key and central role. Either to these companies, when they existed, they had their HQs or headquarters located in one place, and every decision had to be made from HQ or headquarters. Today, however, the nature of the devolution is allowing other companies, or if you like, subsidiaries in these places, all of them able to take decisions which are impacting generally in the emerging market dynamics. The ultimate aim, indeed, is to compete more effectively and especially to do so in emerging markets. And this is being achieved by some of these companies, it must be stated. Let me talk about two key competitive issues which have continued to drive the global business challenge. Firstly, it is important to bear in mind that companies with the skills and resources for competing beyond their domestic markets have major opportunities for growth. So the skills are important and the resources are also important. It is also necessary for me to mention that maintaining a competitive position in the domestic market requires knowledge of key competitors in the global marketplace. So, who are your competitors? Where are they? Even within the domestic setting, it is important to know who are your competitors and know what relation these have with their global partners and consequently in the global marketplace. What new opportunities do these offer? So basically, these two competitive issues that will drive the business challenge today will have to deal with the skills that the company possesses or is able to acquire. What are the capacities that are put in place in terms of this? And then what are the resources that are made available? Some of these resources may be tangible, some of the resources may be intangible resources. And these are very important in this new marketplace. So to maintain that competitive edge or position, these are very important in terms of providing new market opportunities. How are global companies creating a niche? And consequently, if there are other companies, especially in developing economies, how do they, get into that global arena and hold their own? To go into that global arena and to be able to hold their own, it is important that smaller companies, medium to big size companies, especially in developing economies, should look at the pestle approach to dealing with various issues. First, they need to understand the political dynamics in the marketplaces in which they are entering, especially the new emerging markets that we talk about. They need to look at the economic environment. They need to look at the socio-cultural environment. What are the levels of technological penetration in these areas? If you were to take advanced technologies in terms of the internet, what is happening, for example, with respect to the Internet of Things? What is happening with respect to uh, the application of technology? If the levels are not up to standard, up to scratch, then obviously, right from the beginning, there are challenges which need to be addressed. So these would need to be looked at. Remember also that this is the era of sustainability, and therefore ecological and climate concerns are indeed important. And therefore, to find a place in that new competitive business arena, it is important to look at ecological considerations, to look at impact of climate, to look at matters that are today organic, if you like, in character. And that is what various companies are looking at as they enter into that wider marketplace created by globalization. It's also important to look at the legal framework because the legal framework is the basis upon which all other things are eventually captured and translated. Should issues arise, they will have legal connotations, and consequently, this will need to be understood in order that one can create a niche into a new marketplace in which you are entering. In creating a niche, also, it is important to bear in mind there is a need to adapt to the rapidly changing global environment. And consequently, actions that are taken with respect to building capacity, with respect to resources, with respect to harnessing the potential of the business, which should lead to a reduction of costs. Because it is only by looking at a reduction of cost that one could then get the appropriate margins that would create the competitive edge. There is a need today to create more flexible organizational designs. Those old traditional stereotype organizational designs must be relegated into the limbo of forgotten designs. And one must be looking now at more flexible designs that take account of the technological developments that have taken place in the world over the last 20 to 30 years. These are important so that you can, at every stage, have organizational designs that could be horizontal in character, but because of the changes that take place, you could as well change from the horizontal to the perpendicular. You could have a mix of horizontal and perpendicular approaches in organizational designs so that you don't have those traditional stereotype designs that keep one confined to particular ways of doing things. People are today working from home, people are doing flexi hours, and all of these things should form part of organizational designs in order to create a niche in the new marketplace. To build competitive advantage around the core competencies of the organization, they need to look at the physical, the financial, the human capital, and also the intangibles. Very importantly, I like to emphasize the intangibles because while other companies, in terms of competition, can compete with you with respect to the fiscal resources, with respect to the financial resources, because they may be able to access capital which you may not be able to access. The key things that are important here are the two, which are the human capital and what I'll refer to as the intangibles. Those things that are unique characteristics and which cannot easily be copied or be provided by your competitors. Those are critical for creating a niche in the wider or global marketplace. And so consequently, the reduction of costs, creating flexible organizations, building competitive advantage through human capital and intangibles are critical for creating this niche. It is also important that while we look at these broad areas of creating a niche, we should also look at internal actions that need to be undertaken. It is important to set an agenda to pursue excellence. You may be a small company involved in projects, you want to expand, you want to look at new areas, you want to look at new markets, maybe not in areas where already there is, if you like, a high level of competition, but areas where you can easily enter into looking at, for example, the sub-region and trying to enter into these places. It will be important to look at setting an agenda to pursue excellence. Excellence must be the driver, it must be at the heart of what you seek to do. There should be continuous introspection because at every point in time, you need, while looking outward, to be looking inwards and also checking whether indeed you are conforming to the various practices and that you are being creative and innovative enough. In terms of creativity and innovation, it's important to look at the new software. What is the new software? Are you still applying old software in order that you can address issues of the new marketplace? To address the new issues in the new marketplace, you need a new software. And so from time to time, it is imperative to be looking at those things that have brought about innovation, that have brought about creativity. Today, as I said, we are talking about the Internet of Things, and consequently, going to these and looking at blockchain issues that address the challenges that have been brought to the fore today. If you look at matters in shipping, for example, people are talking about blockchain bills of lading today. So you realize that while just a couple of years ago we're talking about electronic bills of lading, today we are shifting to blockchain bills of lading. And consequently, there is a change in the software itself. And so our software must also change in accordance with the changing dynamics. We must also be impatient with the status quo because if we are patient with the status quo, then we remain in our comfort zone. And to remain in our comfort zone, we will not be able to address that dynamic change that is taking place, which is influencing the way in which global business is taking place today. We need to turn our comfortable incremental progress into hungry adventure. Because if we were to wait and see development the way we have seen it in the 1940s and 1950s, they will come by itself. They will come by itself. By the time we realize There is change all around us, and we are wiped out of the marketplace. People always talk about uh, the film industry in terms of Kodak. They talk about the watch industry and what has happened with respect to the mechanical watch and the today the digital watch and what has taken place with respect to Apple and then connectivity, one unit, one equipment merging with another, etc. So today, hungry adventure is the way to look at it, and that is the way in which you will be able to meet the competition in the global marketplace. Then I was also asked to say a little bit about strategic partnerships in this era. If you are a small company and then you want to grow, how do you partner others so that you can move from that small company to a medium-sized company, and then eventually to be able to access the global marketplace? In fact, in terms of strategic partnerships, it is important that we must distinguish, this from maybe various alternate legal forms. That is to say, like a limited liability company or a sole proprietorship. We are looking here at a firm that does not have a legal identity independent of its partners, the way in which we would understand partnership to be. And consequently, that is important because it means then that you are bringing various skill sets together. And where you have your strengths, then those strengths can be used in a synergistic effort to be able to deal with issues which ordinarily a small company would not be able to address. For example, attracting appropriate human resource, attracting appropriate investment and capital. Sometimes these come from the partnerships that you have formed. And this is indeed very, very important. In fact, some have said that yes, we could still remain small, but in this era of mergers, in this era of acquisition, where companies are becoming bigger and bigger, it's been said also that it is to be like arguing against the laws of gravity if you were to argue against globalization, because globalization today has come to stay. How we address its negative impacts is what has become imperative. Today, there is a more demanding competitive environment. There are mergers, there are acquisitions, there is global reach of companies, and everywhere on this earth, it is possible for companies to reach out to various parts of the globe and to set up and to operate and to also perform creditably. And therefore, it's become important that for companies that exist in these domestic markets, they should be looking around themselves and seeing how they can partner or enter into some of these global places. This is the era of the global mega firm. So while we sometimes are not talking about groups and talking about that global company limited liability in character, we are also looking at global firms. Today is the mega firm. Companies like Clifford Chance, the Freshfields, Acom, the IBI Group. These are all, if you like, partners which have firms, firms which have changed their characteristics from the nature of firms that we have known them to be to, if you like, today more of limited partnerships, as it were. These also need to be looked at in terms of globalization. The traditional partnership, as I said, is giving way to a new form of partnership. And in order to be competitive as a firm that is moving from a small firm to a medium firm, these things should be taken cognizance of. Ownership, where it is confined to an elite group of professionals within the firm, is giving way today to unlimited personal liability or the actions of their colleagues. And that indeed is important because partners now share unlimited personal liability or the actions of their colleagues, unknown to the traditional concept of partnership. And this increasingly is the new form that partnership is taking. People are having collective ownership of firms. It is now a financial imperative to monitor and to support what the firm does. And then people are looking at personal and professional levels of development. And these are all new things that the partnership needs to look at. When we look at the partnership in terms of its legal form, then always there is that tension between, if you like, the firm as a firm and partners, you know, because the partners have their individual identities, their individual skills, individual characteristics, which is brought to bear on the firm. But the firm is not like a limited liability company, a legal entity with a persona of its own. And because of that, there is always that tension that exists. And how do we resolve this tension? This tension is only resolved through the ethos, that is to say, if you like, the values that the firm holds. What does it want to be identified with? So that persona, that identity of the firm, that is derived from the ethos, is that which eventually resolves this tension and creates that balance. In fact, that intricate and delicate balance between individualism and collectivism. So you need that fine balance in order that the firm will be able to operate in the global arena. In terms of globalization, it's important for me to mention that today it is widespread. The use of IT is everywhere. You cannot transact business today with your global partners without the use of information technology. This is the era of digital ubiquity. There is increased automation. Costs are reduced as a result of the fast way in which information is flowing and people are carrying out business, and consequently they are increasing their margins, using these margins to spread, to create equity in other places, and consequently diversify the nature of the business. So these are real facts on the ground, and as you seek to expand, as you seek to innovate, you must bear in mind these critical factors. What are some of the new dynamics of the corporate model today? Today, if you look at the corporate model, it is changing. We are looking at groups, and in these groups, the traditional names still exist. But with these traditional names have affiliates, they have subsidiaries, all over the place. Sometimes it's like they have an agglutination with some of these companies. Sometimes they are also separated and, if you like, existing like structures on their own, but still tied to the umbilical cord of their parent companies. You talk about Coca-Cola, you talk about Kellogg's, you talk about P&G, you talk about Nestle, you talk about Kraft, you talk about Mars. And for all of these, today, if you take Coca-Cola, for example, they are into water bottling, etc., as an example. And so you would realize that even though these companies exist as what we know them to be, they have also smaller entities or, if you like, subsidiaries that are producing other things, sometimes within the same realm, sometimes completely diversified, not horizontally, but sometimes even perpendicularly. Then you have the hiring of specialists, as today become the in thing. So we're looking at business development specialists, we are looking at IT specialists, we are looking at human resource specialists. Hitherto, it was felt that these were all not very necessary for companies, and that those who actually they concern themselves with marketing and production and sales were the key things. But today, issues relating to how to develop the business, what kind of business model are we looking at? And then trying to look at alternate business models and dealing with them becomes imperative. Looking at IT as an important driver in terms of competitiveness has become key. Human resource, key to the development of companies today in terms of what they look at, the staff themselves, the human capacity, the quality of skills which ought to be looked at. And today you would realize that, quite frankly, if you were to talk about managing all of these yourself, then it becomes a problem. So uh, if you don't get them right, then obviously the cost becomes terrible. But if you get them right, then the returns are indeed enormous. I have taken you through, if you like, a quick run through globalization. I have tried to look at the dynamics of globalization. I've looked at issues with respect to competition and then how one should meet the challenges that this global competition brings. I've looked at issues of partnership, etc. Now, let me draw a few conclusions in terms of what we have tried to do today. First, I have talked about the global business. I've said that global business is a new phenomenon. It's a new phenomenon because it did not exist in the 1930s, 40s, and beyond even to the 1960s and 70s. It is only quite recently that its impact has really been felt, and consequently, borders have been removed as a result of globalization. I've also talked about the environment and the climate. Today, the business environment is different from what it used to be. The business environment today is an open access business environment which allows us the business environment which allows us today to look much globally, if you like, at what we intend to do. While we are looking at that environment and that climate of business, it is important to realize that we now are dealing more with an environment that borders on, if you like, a borderless transition, no borders in terms of how we move from one place to the other. It's become more of a local place within a global arena. And then also you look at the fact that the infusion of technology, that deep penetration of technology, that paperless mode of transacting business has also had a significant impact on the way in which business is carried out today. I also mentioned issues that relate to technology and the infusion of technology. Hitherto, we knew technology only in terms of the basic forms. Today, however, we are talking about uh, blockchain technologies. We are talking about the Internet of Things. We're talking today about a lot of a lot of things that hitherto one would have thought were impossible today. But today, at the strike of a key or a button, information is sent across the globe, is spread to various areas. Today, the channels of communication are manifold. People, you can talk about Twitter, you can talk about WhatsApp, you can talk about Instagram, you can talk about Facebook, you can talk about the traditional models have given way to new models of communication today that today have a significant impact on business. Today, you are able to reach markets that hitherto you could not reach with the highest infusion of capital in terms of advertisement. Advertisement is today hitting you in the face the moment you go to that global arena called the internet. And consequently, these are affecting the way in which business is done. Today, through YouTube, through links, all this information could be shared, and many people can pick things out of this and improve upon their businesses. This is indeed a new business environment. What are some of the new dynamics that this brings to the fore? The new dynamics that this brings to the fore are that because of the changing patterns, there is also changing patterns in terms of the trade dynamics. And consequently, in recent times, there are concerns about trade wars, tariff and non-tariff barriers. And when we look at the stance taken by the UK and also the retaliation from China and the global impact that this has on other companies and how Europe and India or Asia, China, and the rest feel some of the impact, all of this becomes very real. These global dynamics are as a result of some of the geopolitical tensions that are taking place in the world, not only with respect to America and China, but also if you look at the issues with respect to Iran, and also issues that relate to the Gulf and what is happening with respect to Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and in very recent times, issues that have political inclinations but which come to have economic bearings. These are all important in the fray of the new dynamics that create geopolitical tensions that affect the economic climate of the global business place. And these are happening, and consequently, these need to be addressed. If you look at recent times, the issues of Brexit and what Brexit portends, not only for Europe, but for the United Kingdom, which is a big player in the global arena, and consequently the need for the United Kingdom to look at new markets, so it's stretching forth its tentacles not only to Asia but also to Africa, and looking at new marketplaces in terms of the dynamics because of what Brexit brings to the table. So it is quite clear that these geopolitical tensions have a role to play in terms of how we organize our structures, in terms of the building blocks which we put in place so that we can address some of the challenges. Because even though some of these may be far removed from us, it is imperative to bear in mind that when any of these great powers sneeze, then developing economies especially catch cold. And these dynamics, therefore, need from time to time to be monitored, to be evaluated, and consequently, to the need for us to put in place appropriate structures, appropriate mechanisms in order to ensure that we address the effects of this because we have no capacity to address these by themselves. But how we are impacted by these is what we can seek to address by putting in place the appropriate mechanisms and structures. I've also talked about global competition, and I have said that today global competition is the in thing, and consequently, in every small arena, there is competition taking place. And to be able to thrive, to be able to survive, to be able to be successful at this new marketplace, then one must be able to meet the competition. You'd realize that today there are many who, as a result of their inability or the incapacity to meet the global competition, are either subsumed or are involved in measures or acquisitions, as it were, building much more, if you like, mega or bigger companies, as it were. And therefore, if you don't address the challenges that these portend, then obviously you'll be thrown out of the marketplace. The dynamics is so strong, the competition is so strong that you need to be alert. You need to consistently be focused and realize that the sands are continuously shifting. And consequently, if you do not adjust yourself appropriately to these shifting situations, it is not possible for you as a small player to be able to meet the global competition and to not only remain competitive, but even to remain in the marketplace in the first place. You'll be wiped away. Then, in the midst of all this, the need, therefore, for global regulation becomes imperative because as these dynamics takes place, always it leads to a situation in which there is a rupture of the way in which the global marketplace has traditionally performed, and consequently, it has an impact on downward trends. So these global economic downturns, like what we saw in 2008, 2009, that affected the entire global marketplace, these are likely to rear their heads without global regulation. And that is where the OECD countries, the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, in terms of what they do in the global arena, becomes very important because other than that, there is great destabilization, and that destabilization affects the world economy. So consequently, it comes to affect whether emerging or developing economies, it comes to affect them as such. How then does one stay afloat? Staying afloat means being innovative, being creative, being aware of the global dynamics, especially the geopolitical tensions. Staying afloat implies a recognition that today the dynamics of business has changed, and consequently, there is a great deal of an infusion of technology, and one needs to imbibe that technology in order to be able to play in that arena. Today, it is the big ticket issues that ones are looking at. And therefore, if you are small and you want to get into the big ticket, then you have to look at the global arena critically, look at innovation, look at creativity, look at the new modes of doing things, and consequently focus and adopt a new software that would enable you stand firm, be sustainable, and compete globally and successfully in this global arena. Thank you very much for your attention.